Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 92nd Street Y. I want to welcome everyone here at the Y, but also all of those watching around the world via live stream. We not only have in the room here some of the people who are working on Giving Tuesday campaigns in New York and beyond, but all over the US and in fact all over the world, we have groups of people tuning in who are planning their own Giving Tuesday campaigns this year. So I want to make a special welcome to all of those around the world taking part today. My name is Henry Timms. I'm the Executive Director of the 92nd Street Y. We're a Jewish cultural and community centre reaching out to serve people of all backgrounds. And it's been our great privilege to have been working on Giving Tuesday since the very beginning, building a community around the simple idea, the idea that after 2 days dedicated to consumption, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, we might bring together a community around giving back. We might bring together a group of people to break those borders of self-interest and think for a day about others, especially at a time when we as fundraisers, and many of us in this room and beyond are fundraisers, are thinking carefully about how we raise the funds we need for the rest of the year. I have the privilege today of giving some opening remarks, and I thought I'd start by talking about my recent vacation, which I'm sure you're all fascinated in learning more about. So I had a very well-deserved vacation in Cape May on the northern tip of New Jersey and took a couple of days off with the family, so it wasn't much of a time off, but it was a switch off. It was a switch off rather than a time off. And one of the things you think when you're in Cape May is you read the local newspapers and you run along the beach, and at the end of the beach there's a sign where it says that the Kiwanis every day lift up a flag. They raise a flag every day and they bring it down every day to honor troops. And you read the local newspapers, and those newspapers are stories of the Elks group. And the Elks, and you see kind of the big, powerful people who are part of the Elks movement who are serving people locally. And in a way, particularly for those people who spend their time in a kind of social media world, it's easy to be a bit snooty. You kind of look at these kind of people later in their lives doing these very old and traditional ways of giving and philanthropy. But it reminds us that one of the things we are bound to do is to find new rituals, is to remember that one of the most important things we do as human beings is to ritualize, is to find ways of over and over again cementing those things that are important in our lives and celebrating them together. And as I was looking at these rituals which have been started so many years ago, it reminded me that what this community has done with Giving Tuesday is started a new ritual. We've begun a movement which is now heading into its 4th year, where all around the world people pause to think of others. We'll talk a lot today about data, we'll talk about impact, we'll talk about things which are fundamental. But the driving idea behind Giving Tuesday from the start wasn't digital, it was human. It was an idea that could we actually get people connecting in a meaningful way with one another. And I want to tell you a couple of stories, not all about Cape May, but about some other parts of the world, which kind of tell me a story about what we're learning from Giving Tuesday so far. So yesterday I was in Westchester, and they had invited me to come and speak at the kickoff of the Westchester Giving Tuesday movement, which they had started last year. And in that room, you saw this amazing thing, which was you saw maybe 100 non-profits and local organizations coming together to think about how they might approach Giving Tuesday as a community. You had in the room the local media organizations, all of whom had already committed to cover the Giving Tuesday movement. And you heard stories from people who had run Giving Tuesday campaigns last year, from those who had made a whole bunch of money. We saw Pace University have a particularly good campaign last year, from a local organization who had wrapped and received all of their Christmas gifts they wanted to donate because of the volunteer drive they ran on Giving Tuesday. And just amazing to think that what's happening with Giving Tuesday is these communities, these self-organized communities, just like the one in this room, are beginning to take place around the world. And it's not just true of Westchester. Earlier this year I was in London, where they had invited me to come and speak at the kickoff of Giving Tuesday UK. And they had 200 businesses, non-profits, government ministers together for a day to learn about what was working in philanthropy, how they could connect more deeply with their constituents, how they could come together and launch Giving Tuesday UK this year. And as you go even further around the world, even now in Kenya, this year I'm really pleased to announce that Giving Tuesday Kenya is launching this year, when people around the country in Kenya are coming together to think how they might engage as a community to think about giving. When we began Giving Tuesday, we were all thinking that this was a very American idea, even with an accent as British as mine. This always felt like quite an American idea, right? You would need to have Thanksgiving and Black Friday to make sense of Giving Tuesday. What's becoming clearer, however, is because of the movement you have generated around this idea, people are simply seeing Giving Tuesday in its own terms. They're seeing it as a moment of global unity. I think that's a tremendously important idea going forward. I want to say a couple of thank yous, given today is a pause, right? Today is kind of 6 months out from Giving Tuesday. And it's been a movement that's moved very, very quickly. We've always kind of run fast with Giving Tuesday, and I think that's been the right thing to do. But by doing that, we sometimes haven't taken all the time we should have done to thank some people we've been inspired by. So I wanted just to mention a couple of groups of people who had inspired Giving Tuesday and on whose shoulders we climbed. The first is Twestival. You may not remember Twestival, but it was a really innovative early effort to think about how you might raise money online via social media. I want to credit them today. I want to credit too Comic Relief in the UK, which actually had an effort this year in the US too. Comic Relief was something which really inspired Giving Tuesday. I want to credit, thirdly, the work of people who had worked on Giving Days before Giving Tuesday. So one of the most important documents we read when we were beginning this campaign was the Case Foundation's research around Giving Days and what was working and what wasn't working. That really helped us build too. The reason I want to mention those things is because we owe them a great debt of gratitude, but also because of something bigger, which is we in the philanthropic world are so much stronger when we are connected. When we see our efforts not as individual efforts, but those connected to a broader community. And one really important idea for Giving Tuesday going forward, I think, is that we see ourselves not simply as a day and not simply as a moment, but we see ourselves as big, as a small part of a much bigger philanthropic tapestry. With that said, I want to think about, shift gears and think about this year, and think about 4 things that are on my mind as we should all be thinking about throughout the Giving Tuesday as we think about what Giving Tuesday 2015 looks like. So I want us to think this year especially about 4 M's. The first M this year is mobile, or which for my friends in the UK, mobile. I got into trouble with that recently. Shows I've gone native. So first is mobile, right? One of the things the nonprofit sector and actually Blackboard put together some fascinating data on this. 17% of the monies raised on Giving Tuesday via Blackboard last year was via mobile. We are seeing a huge rise in mobile giving. Safe to say the nonprofit sector as a whole is not well equipped to embrace that trend. So if Giving Tuesday could do one thing for a lot of nonprofits this year, it would be encouraging them to take mobile more seriously and to get literate from a mobile perspective. M number 2 is matches. I think one of the things we've seen time and time again working well for Giving Tuesday is matching campaigns. So I would encourage everyone who is thinking about Giving Tuesday this year to think about those people in your community who might be prepared to put up a match you can raise new or increased money against. That strategy has worked time and time again, and I think it's extraordinarily important. The third M is measures. So just today, Blackboard released a really deep data dive on what we've learned so far of Giving Tuesday. And Beth Cantor, who I think in many ways is perhaps the most informed and broad-thinking member of the social good community, one of the things she always talks about with Giving Tuesday is how Giving Tuesday can become a connected learning experience, that we can actually all learn from one another. So one thing I think we're beginning to see with Giving Tuesday is actually by having a lot smarter data, we're getting a lot better learning, but that requires us all to have measures. So I would think really carefully about what measures you want to have for Giving Tuesday this year. One of the criticisms I think we might all think about as a sector with Giving Tuesday is too few of us had really clear goals for our campaign, right? A lot of people thought it's Giving Tuesday, I'd like a whole bunch of money, right? That was the kind of instinctive approach. Those people who did best were those who were most strategic. Those people who saw Giving Tuesday as a day just to see the internet as a cash register, that was typically not a very successful strategy. Those people who saw Giving Tuesday as part of a bigger storytelling opportunity around what their organization stood for made profound progress. So I would think about measures too for 2 reasons. One, because I think we all need to be smarter about thinking about data. 2, because we all need to set ourselves clearer goals. And the last M is the M this campaign began with, which is meaning. For all our talk about measures and all our obsession with data and all our mobile-first strategies, the reason we are philanthropists, the reason we spend our lives trying to do things is because we are searching for meaning, not because we are searching for data. That is not to diminish data, but it's to remind us that the most powerful stories we hear around Giving Tuesday are those of meaning. And let me finish with just one. So we have all heard, of course, recently of the many challenges in the city of Baltimore. And 2 years ago, Baltimore actually declared it was going to be the most generous city in the country on Giving Tuesday. And 2 years ago, they hit the goal they said they would. They raised over $5 million in a day for local organizations in Baltimore. And everyone was involved, from the mayor's office through to people selling pizzas, through to local foundations, through to local philanthropists. Last year, building on what they had achieved with Baltimore, they said we're going to be the most generous state in the country. And in that state, they raised over $9 million last year as a part of the Maryland Gives campaign. This year, I anticipate we'll see the state top over $10 million, but that's not the story I want to tell you. The story I want to tell you was on that day in Baltimore, there was a lady who learned about Giving Tuesday, and it touched her, it spoke to something inside her, but she didn't have much to give. What she did have was a great piano. She had a great piano in her house, which she didn't use anymore. And on Giving Tuesday, she thought, what could I do with this piano? How could this be helpful to people? So she reached out to her local school. On the day of Giving Tuesday, she donated her piano to the school. The kids came and got the piano. The piano went from her house down to the local school. And that told a story about human meaning, which can't be measured in the data of one piano, or 6 kids, or one old lady. It can be measured in that human quest we are all chasing with philanthropy, which is to find ways just once in a while to feel that much more human. If there's one driving ambition I have for Giving Tuesday, it would simply be that. So as I welcome you all here to the Y, let me say first how grateful I am to all of you for believing in this movement and for coming together. Giving Tuesday has been a remarkable experiment in collaboration. We have learned so much of it here at the 92nd Street Y, and we couldn't be more proud to host this event and to be involved so centrally in this movement. But let me thank you for something else too. Those in this room and those around the world who are today part of this event, you are the people who are the organizers for this year. You're the people who are going to be spending the extra hours, twisting the extra arms, thinking the extra thought. You're the people who are bringing together this whole community around the world. You're connected to people today here in New York, in Kenya, in the UK, in Singapore, in Israel. All around the world, there is a community of people you have joined with Giving Tuesday. I can't wait to see what we achieve together this year. Welcome to the 92nd Street Y.